Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. When truth knocks on the door, even the highest walls of power start shaking. That's not poetry, that's reality, and you're about to see how real it gets. Did you know that in the US alone, federal investigations are triggered when a case carries so much weight, it threatens to expose not just individuals but entire systems? That's not neighborhood drama, that's national business. And here's the twist. Your victory hit so hard it forced the big dogs to step in, shut it down and put the final nail in the coffin. Think about that for a second. You didn't just win. You won on a scale that demanded the attention of people whose job is usually chasing cartels, white-collar fraud and billion-dollar crimes. That's how heavy your truth landed. That's how deep their downfall went. And the best part? While they thought they were untouchable, hiding behind influence and manipulation, you turned into the plot twist they never saw coming. You became the headline. They became the cautionary tale. It's almost funny. The same people who once laughed at you are now the ones begging for mercy in rooms with no cameras and no exits. So buckle up, because this isn't just about winning. This is about what happens when justice comes roaring through like an uninvited guest at their dinner party, flips the table and says, "Case closed." Number 1. Winning exposed the rotten foundations of their entire system. Winning exposed the rotten foundations of their entire system. And that's exactly why your victory felt bigger than just you. For years they operated like their structure was untouchable, built on intimidation, influence and manipulation. On the surface it looks solid, but what your case did was strip away the paint and show the mold underneath. When the feds had to step in, it wasn't only to address the wrongs done to you, it was because the entire setup they were part of was collapsing from its own corruption. That's the kind of win you don't see every day, one that reveals how fragile power really is when it's built on lies. The system they thought they controlled wasn't as bulletproof as they believed. They relied on people being afraid, on everyone turning a blind eye, and on the idea that the little guy could never actually win. But the moment the truth couldn't be hidden anymore, the whole network of protection they had built crumbled. Suddenly, the very system they thought would shield them had to investigate them. That's not just losing, that's exposure. And exposure cuts deeper than any punishment. This is why your win mattered on more than just a personal level. It showed that what they built wasn't sustainable. They thrived on secrecy, on bending rules, on exploiting cracks in the system. But the second you stood firm, the cracks split wide open, and it was obvious their foundation was rotten all along. The feds didn't come because they cared about small things. They came because your case revealed something bigger, something that threatened to eat away at justice itself if left unchecked. And here's the deeper truth. They weren't just exposed to the public, they were exposed to themselves. For the first time, they had to face the reality that the world they created wasn't strong, it was hollow. They had no power outside of the manipulation they clung to, and when that manipulation was stripped away, there was nothing left but guilt, fear, and consequences. Your win proved something people forget. Power without integrity is a ticking time bomb. And when it goes off, it doesn't just destroy individuals, it shakes entire systems to their core. That's exactly what your case did. Number 2, their power was an illusion until your case demolished it. Their power was an illusion until your case demolished it, and that's the truth they never wanted to face. For so long, they walked around like giants, puffed up by influence, fear, and the ability to silence anyone who got in their way. They looked untouchable, like they had every angle covered. But when the dust settled, what they called power turned out to be smoke and mirrors. Your victory ripped through the performance and showed everyone that their control was nothing more than an act. What made their downfall so shocking was that people had bought into the illusion for years. They convinced others that their reach was endless, that they had connections in every corner, that consequences didn't apply to them. And to a degree, it worked. People were too scared to question it. Illusion is fragile. Reality doesn't break. They had been performing so long that even they started believing their own lies. That's why the exposure cut so deep. They weren't prepared to see how small they really were without their tricks. And here's the sting that will haunt them forever. People who once feared them now see them for what they always were: weak, desperate, and dependent on manipulation to feel powerful. Once that curtain was pulled back, there was no going back to the image they worked so hard to protect. The illusion is shattered permanently. Your case wasn't just about justice being served, it was about tearing down a false empire and reminding everyone that appearances are temporary, but truth is permanent. That's why their power didn't just fade, it dissolved the moment your victory proved they never had any real power to begin with. Number 3, your survival became federal evidence. Your survival became federal evidence, and that's the kind of twist no one saw coming. Every single thing they tried to use to destroy you ended up turning against them. The scars, the silence, the resilience, all the things they thought were weaknesses became undeniable proof of what really happened. You didn't just live through what they put you through. You carried the receipts in your body, your story, your persistence, and your ability to still stand when they expected you to be gone. That was the evidence no one could erase. When the Feds stepped in, they weren't just looking at files, reports, or testimonies. They were looking at the fact that you had survived every attempt to erase you, and that survival alone confirmed something bigger was at play. They couldn't cover it up anymore. The endurance you carried became a trail of truth one they could not ignore. In a way, your life became the strongest testimony in the entire case. Documents can be altered, witnesses can be coached, but survival doesn't lie, it speaks for itself. This is why your presence became heavier than any courtroom argument. Every day you showed up, still breathing, still speaking, still refusing to back down, was another nail in the coffin of their lies. Your existence itself counted everything they claimed. They wanted to label you broken, but all they did was prove you were unbreakable. That unshakable presence made it impossible for the case to be dismissed as rumor, exaggeration, or misunderstanding. You were living proof that something devastating had been done, and you were also proof that they failed to finish you. And here's what makes this powerful. The same survival they mocked became the very thing that brought their downfall. They thought you being alive meant they had gotten away with it, but in reality, it meant their crimes had a witness they could never silence. Your endurance testified louder than any expert, any attorney, any investigator. It shouted without words that the system had to act. Survival was your evidence, and that evidence forced the kind of justice they never thought they'd have to face. They couldn't erase you, so the system had no choice but to erase them. That's how your survival became the final proof that closed the case. Number 4, justice didn't just side with you, it needed you. Justice didn't just side with you, it needed you. What most people don't realize is that the system isn't infallible. Laws exist, rules exist, but without someone willing to push the truth forward, the machinery of justice can grind to a halt or bend under pressure. Your fight didn't just force a verdict. It forced the system itself to confront what it had been ignoring, what it had been compromising on, and what it risked losing if left unchecked. The courts didn't simply deliver a judgment in your favor. They were compelled to act because your case exposed gaps, corruption, and moral shortcuts that threatened the very integrity of justice. Every move you made, every piece of evidence you preserved, every ounce of resilience you demonstrated became the leverage the system needed to recalibrate itself. Your courage didn't just protect you. It forced the gears of law and accountability to turn in the right direction. Without your relentless pursuit, those gaps might have remained hidden, and the wrong people might have continued walking free while the system slowly corroded from within. In a way, your battle became the correction the justice system itself desperately needed to avoid complete moral bankruptcy. It wasn't about luck, influence, or timing. It was about necessity. The system needed someone who wouldn't bend, someone whose presence and truth would demand action. Your fight became the standard against which the integrity of the entire process was measured. Every objection they tried to use, every lie they attempted to slip through only highlighted how indispensable your role had become. You weren't just a participant, you were the pivot point that ensured the scales of justice didn't tip irreparably. In the end, the victory wasn't just yours. It was a victory for the system too, because you forced it to live up to its purpose. By standing firm, by refusing to be silenced, you didn't just win your case, you restored the balance that had been threatened. Justice didn't just side with you, it needed you to survive, to fight, and to prove that accountability was not negotiable. Your persistence became the backbone of a system that had almost forgotten how to operate with true integrity. Number 5. Their reputation wasn't destroyed by rumors, but by receipts. Their reputation wasn't destroyed by rumors, but by receipts. Everything they thought could stay hidden. Every lie they spun, every corner they cut, all of it came back to them in a way that couldn't be ignored. For years they relied on whispers, on the idea that people wouldn't talk, that stories could be controlled, that perception could outweigh reality. They built a fortress of gossip, hoping that if no one saw the truth wouldn't matter. But rumors are fragile, and your case proved that facts are relentless. It wasn't the chatter behind closed doors that broke them. It was the evidence, the documents, the undeniable proof of what actually happened. Every text, every email, every record, every witness, each one stacked on top of the other until the weight was unbearable. They had no escape route, no spin, no excuse that could withstand the sheer volume of reality pointing at them. Their reputation didn't crumble because someone said something. It crumbled because the truth became undeniable and public. What makes this even more extraordinary is how methodical the undoing was. Nothing happened by accident. Their web of manipulation was dismantled piece by piece, and each piece was documented in ways they never anticipated. The very tools they used to control perception became the chains that held them accountable. They tried to outrun reality, but reality doesn't have a back door and receipts don't lie. In the end, what destroyed them wasn't noise or opinion. It was the weight of truth they thought they could bury. Every attempt to maintain a pristine image failed because facts have a stubborn way of catching up. And while they once believed they could manipulate how people saw them, your victory turned their own history into a record of exposure. Their reputation didn't die quietly. It collapsed under the unavoidable pressure of evidence, leaving nothing but the truth standing in stark contrast to every lie they ever told. Their downfall was absolute, complete, and public, and it happened not because of stories, but because reality finally got its day in court. Number 6. Your case turned into a mirror for every hidden predator. Your case turned into a mirror for every hidden predator, reflecting everything they hoped would stay in the shadows. It wasn't just about one trial or one verdict. It became a demonstration of what happens when someone refuses to be silenced, refuses to be intimidated, and refuses to allow lies to stay unchallenged. Every person who thought their actions could remain secret, every manipulator who assumed the world wouldn't notice, now had to face the reality that someone was watching, recording, and willing to fight. Your courage became the standard by which others' accountability could no longer be avoided. This case sent a message that went far beyond the courtroom. It said that abuse, corruption, and exploitation are no longer invisible. It showed that systems, no matter how complicated or well hidden, are vulnerable when someone refuses to back down. Every predator who had assumed immunity suddenly saw themselves in your story, and they saw how quickly the tables could turn. They realized that the same attention, the same investigative focus, could land on them at any time. It was a wake-up call written in the harshest terms. No one is untouchable. What made this even more powerful was how it exposed the network around the predators. People who enabled, covered for, or ignored wrongdoing were forced to reconsider their positions. The ripple effect of your case reached far beyond what most would imagine. It created a climate of accountability that forced everyone in the shadows to recognize the risk of exposure. They could no longer act with confidence that their actions would go unnoticed or unpunished. Your case didn't just bring justice to you, it illuminated the darkness where others hid. It became a warning shot, a precedent, and a mirror all at once. Those who thrived in secrecy now had to measure themselves against the standard of your courage. Your victory made it clear that someone will always notice, and the spotlight of truth can reach even the most carefully concealed crimes. The lesson was unmistakable. The world is watching, and justice, when summoned, doesn't discriminate. Number 7. The victory hurt more than prison time. The victory hurt more than prison time because what they truly feared wasn't a sentence or confinement. It was the collapse of their carefully constructed image. For years, they built themselves up as untouchable, as someone above consequences, someone whose influence could bend rules and silence critics. They relied on perception, on the aura of power to intimidate and control. Losing that image was like having their very identity ripped apart. Prison, fines, or legal penalties are temporary, but the shattering of their reputation, the public confirmation that their power was nothing but smoke and mirrors, left a wound that could never fully heal. Every person who once looked up to them, feared them, or followed them, began to see the truth. The illusion of invincibility crumbled, and with it their authority, their confidence, and their ability to manipulate others. That public exposure was far more punishing than bars could ever be, because it attacked the one thing they had always depended on: perception. People don't just judge actions, they judge the power behind them. When that power evaporated, what remained was a person exposed, vulnerable, and unable to hide behind the same walls of influence that once protected them. The psychological impact was enormous. Their pride, arrogance, and sense of control were replaced by shame, fear, and desperation. Every interaction, every look, every whispered conversation became a reminder of their fall. They were no longer the untouchable figure they had projected. They were a cautionary tale for anyone who had believed in their invincibility. That is why your victory resonated so deeply. It wasn't just a legal win. It was a symbolic reckoning, and the lasting effect of that reckoning is even more profound. Prison sentences end, but reputations, once destroyed, shape how the world treats someone for the rest of their life. Your victory didn't just punish them legally, it rewrote their legacy. The public exposure, the humiliation, the undeniable truth of their downfall, all of it hurt more than any cell could, and it will linger long after the case is closed. In the end, losing the image of power was a defeat far greater than any physical punishment, because power is the currency they valued most, and you stripped it away completely. You had number 8, you forced silence to break its contract. You forced silence to break its contract, and that's the kind of impact most people never see coming. For years, so many around them stayed quiet, pretending not to see, pretending not to hear, and pretending not to know. That silence wasn't passive. It was an unspoken agreement that allowed abuse, corruption, and manipulation to thrive. People believed that if they didn't speak, they could protect themselves, or worse, that silence would somehow protect the abuser. But your case shattered that arrangement completely. The quiet that once shielded them from accountability became a trap, and every voice that had been restrained suddenly had to confront what was real. The power of your fight wasn't just in proving the truth, it was in forcing others to confront theirs. Witnesses, allies, and even passive onlookers could no longer remain in the comfort of silence. Every testimony, every corroboration, every acknowledgement became part of the momentum that brought justice. You didn't just win a case, you broke a system that relied on secrecy. By standing up, by refusing to be muted, you created a space where the unspoken could no longer be ignored. That kind of rupture is transformative. Once silence is broken, it can never return in the same way. People who had stayed in the shadows now had to speak or live with the guilt of their complicity. Your courage forced the walls of fear and denial to crack. And when they did, it wasn't just about exposing the abuser. It was about reclaiming integrity for everyone who had been trapped by quiet compliance. Your victory proved a simple but devastating truth. Silence only has power when it's allowed to operate unchecked. The moment someone refuses to accept it, the illusion collapses. You didn't just speak. You dismantled a contract that had bound people to inaction, fear, and complicity. And in doing so, you didn't just win for yourself, you forced the system, the community, and every observer to recognize that the cost of staying quiet is far higher than the risk of speaking up. Your case became a loud, undeniable signal that silence has limits, and those limits were shattered. Number 9, their end wasn't just legal, it was spiritual bankruptcy. Their end wasn't just legal, it was spiritual bankruptcy. The courtroom ruling was the final seal on something that had been building far beyond the walls of law. It was the inevitable consequence of everything they had put out into the world finally catching up with them. Their influence, their manipulations, their attempts to dominate and control were all forms of energy they spent recklessly. And in the end, that energy had nothing left to sustain them. The system simply reflected what had already been written in spirit. Their currency of power, trust, and moral authority had been completely depleted. Every lie, every deception, every act of intimidation wasn't just breaking the law, it was eroding the very foundation of who they were at the core. They traded integrity for control, authenticity for fear, and compassion for manipulation. Eventually, that deficit couldn't be hidden, and when it met the undeniable truth of your victory, the exposure didn't just punish them legally, it revealed a deeper collapse. They were bankrupt, not in finances or influence alone, but in the fundamental energy that defines a person's spirit. This is why the impact of your case goes beyond headlines or legal records. The system delivered justice, yes, but it was also a reflection of cosmic balance. A statement that what had been drained, wasted, and corrupted could no longer maintain its illusion of life. They lost far more than a trial. They lost credibility, moral weight, and the invisible force that had allowed them to believe they were untouchable. Your victory didn't just close a case, it exposed a spiritual emptiness that cannot be faked or restored. And the haunting truth for them is that no court, no pardon, no appeal can replenish what they spent so carelessly. The system enforced the law, but the universe had already written the verdict long before. Their essence had run dry. That's why, therefore, resonates so profoundly. It's not only a story of legal defeat, it's proof that actions drain the soul, and when that energy is fully spent, the collapse is absolute. They were finished before the gavel even struck, and your triumph simply made that reality undeniable. Number 10. You made corruption fearful of its own reflection. You made corruption fearful of its own reflection. The moment your case came to light, the people who had grown comfortable in their manipulation, cover-ups, and shady dealings suddenly had to look in the mirror and face the truth about themselves. They realized that the same reckoning you faced could land on them at any moment. Your battle didn't just target the individual wrongdoers, it sent tremors through everyone who had relied on secrecy and influence to get away with wrongdoing. The fear wasn't just about legal consequences, it was the awareness that their own misdeeds could be exposed with the same relentlessness and clarity. What makes this extraordinary is how it disrupted the ecosystem of corruption. People who once acted with impunity started second-guessing every decision, every connection, every choice that had previously felt untouchable. Your case became a mirror not just for the main offenders, but for anyone who had thrived in the shadows, thinking their actions would never be scrutinized. Suddenly their confidence was shaken and the illusion of invulnerability began to crumble. The ripple effect is profound. Corruption survives on certainty, the certainty that no one is watching, no one will speak up, and consequences will be avoided. Your courage and persistence eliminated that certainty. By refusing to be silenced, and by ensuring the truth was undeniable, you forced even the most hardened manipulators to confront the possibility that they could be next. Every corrupt system relies on momentum and complacency. You disrupted both. In the end, your victory wasn't just personal justice, it was a warning, a tremor, and a disruption to the very mindset that allows corruption to flourish. Those who once believed themselves untouchable now carry the same fear and uncertainty that they once imposed on others. You forced the mirror onto them, and in that reflection, they saw exactly how fragile their power really was. The exposure wasn't just legal or public, it was psychological, ethical, and unavoidably humiliating. You didn't just win. You reshaped the landscape of power and made corruption afraid of its own shadow. Number 11. Justice didn't arrive late. It arrived loud. Justice didn't arrive late. It arrived loud. People like to complain that the system moves slowly, that it drags its feet while the guilty continue to operate unchecked. Your case proved that timing isn't weakness, it's precision. Every delay, every obstacle, every pushback wasn't the system failing. It was the moment before the perfect strike. When the hammer fell, it didn't just land quietly behind closed doors. It came down like a thunderclap, rattling everyone who thought they were untouchable, echoing through the very corridors of power that had once shielded them. The loudness of justice wasn't just metaphorical. It was the exposure, the public records, the undeniable proof that no one could ignore. It was the collective acknowledgement that the truth had finally caught up, and there was no escaping it. Every whisper, every attempt to manipulate perception, every lie they counted on to hold them in place was obliterated in that moment. The impact wasn't subtle. It demanded attention. Those who had underestimated the strength of your resolve now had to reckon with the force of the system itself, activated and unstoppable. What makes this moment extraordinary is how it shattered expectations. Justice isn't just about rulings, fines, or sentences. It's about the message sent to anyone watching, anyone complicit, anyone tempted to believe that they could act without consequence. The noise of your victory ensured that this wasn't just a personal triumph. It became a precedent, a public declaration that wrongdoing, no matter how well hidden, will be confronted with full force when the time is right. And the brilliance of it lies in the contrast. The silence, the delays, the waiting period. They made the final action deafening. People weren't just aware that justice had been served, they felt it, they heard it, they couldn't escape it. Your victory didn't just close a case, it shattered illusions and left a lasting resonance that reverberates far beyond the courtroom. When justice finally arrived, it wasn't patient or quiet. It was explosive, undeniable, and irreversible. Number 12. You didn't just close a case, you rewrote history. You didn't just close a case, you rewrote history. This wasn't merely about winning a personal battle or seeing justice served in the courtroom. What you accomplished went far beyond that. Your case became a turning point, a line drawn in the sand that changed how abuse, manipulation, and corruption are viewed and addressed. The narrative that once allowed predators to operate with impunity was shattered, replaced by a record of accountability that can't be ignored or erased. You didn't just participate in a legal process, you created a precedent that shifts the story for everyone who comes after. The significance of your victory is in its permanence. Cases like yours don't just resolve individual disputes. They expose systemic flaws, highlight patterns of wrongdoing, and force institutions to confront the gaps they once ignored. Your fight became a blueprint for holding people accountable, proving that silence, fear, and influence are not stronger than truth and resilience. By standing firm, you made it impossible for similar abuses to be treated the same way again. History now remembers not just the crime, but the consequences of trying to hide it. This rewriting of history isn't only about legal records, it's about perception, culture, and awareness. The people who once thought they could act without scrutiny are now permanently altered by your example. Communities, institutions, and even individuals watching have a new understanding. Wrongdoing can and will be exposed, and those responsible will face consequences no matter how powerful they think they are. You transformed what could have been a quiet, forgotten case into a landmark moment that speaks to the broader fight against corruption and abuse. By closing this case, you didn't just claim justice for yourself, you demanded that the world acknowledge a higher standard. You changed how similar situations will be approached in the future, ensuring that patterns that were once overlooked can no longer be ignored. Your victory became more than personal. It became a turning point, a historical marker, and a lesson to anyone who thought their actions could go unseen. In doing so, you didn't just close a chapter, you rewrote the book entirely. Number 13, they weren't just defeated, they were documented. They weren't just defeated, they were documented. Their loss didn't vanish quietly into the shadows or get buried under whispers. It was recorded, preserved, and made undeniable. Every action, every lie, every attempt to manipulate or abuse was now part of the official record. Losing to you didn't just bring personal shame, it created a permanent footprint that no apology, influence, or spin could erase. Their names are etched in history alongside the truth of their crimes, leaving a legacy that can never be reclaimed or rewritten. This documentation is what makes their defeat absolute. They might have once believed that power could protect them, that influence could hide them, or that intimidation could silence the truth. But the evidence, the rulings, and the official records tell a story that cannot be contested. Every person who follows that trail sees exactly what happened. Their attempts at control are exposed for what they were: temporary, fragile, and ultimately futile. What makes this even more devastating is the permanence of public record. Unlike fleeting shame or gossip, which fades with time, documentation creates a history that will always exist. The world now has undeniable proof of their actions, and that proof will shape how they are remembered forever. Their names are no longer associated with power, status, or respect. They are tied to wrongdoing, deceit, and accountability. Your victory ensured that their fall wasn't just immediate, it was lasting. Defeat can be forgotten, but documentation immortalizes consequences. Every future reference to their actions will carry the weight of what you uncovered and achieved. Their influence, their facade of control, and their reputation are permanently overshadowed by the truth you brought to light. In defeating them, you didn't just win a battle. You created an unshakable record that guarantees their legacy is stained, undeniable, and remembered exactly as it should be. Number 14, your victory made them an example and you a precedent. Your victory made them an example and you a precedent. For them, the ending was humiliation, a public reckoning that stripped away every facade of control, influence, and untouchability they had relied on for so long. Every lie they told, every corner they cut, every manipulation they thought would protect them was exposed in full view. Their downfall wasn't quiet. It was unmistakable, a cautionary tale carved into the record for anyone tempted to follow in their footsteps. They became the living example of what happens when power is abused, and the world watched as their carefully constructed empire crumbled under the weight of truth. For you, the victory was a transformation. You didn't just close a case, you redefined the way justice interacts with resilience and courage. Your refusal to be intimidated, your insistence on truth, and your unwavering persistence became a benchmark for how cases like yours could and should be handled. In standing your ground, you became more than a survivor. You became a precedent. You proved that one person, armed with determination and truth, can force even the most entrenched system to act. You showed that the machinery of law, influence, and power is not absolute. It bends when confronted by courage that refuses to yield. The duality of your victory is what makes it extraordinary. On one side, there's the humiliation of those who thought themselves untouchable. On the other, there's the elevation of someone who refused to break, who transformed adversity into authority, and who turned a personal fight into a broader statement about accountability. You didn't just win a battle, you set a standard. Your case will be referenced, studied, and remembered as a turning point, proof that persistence, integrity, and courage can bend even the most rigid systems. In the end, your victory carries weight far beyond yourself. It reshapes the landscape of accountability, marks the fall of those who abused power, and solidifies you as a precedent for anyone who refuses to be silenced. Their end became a warning. Your triumph became a blueprint. You didn't just win, you changed the rules of the game. Your victory wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a seismic shift. Every lie they built, every manipulation they relied on, every illusion of power they clung to was shattered because you refused to break. You didn't just win a case, you exposed rotten foundations, turned survival into evidence, forced silence to shatter, and made corruption tremble in its own reflection. The system didn't just side with you, it needed you. And when justice finally arrived, it didn't come quietly. It thundered, echoing across every level of power, leaving no room for doubt, manipulation, or escape. Your triumph rewrote history, documented their downfall permanently, and turned their humiliation into a lesson for anyone tempted to believe they are untouchable. For them, the end was shame, exposure, and spiritual bankruptcy. For you, the end is transformation, power, and precedent. You became living proof that one unbroken person can bend systems, expose corruption, and force accountability where none existed before. You didn't just survive the storm. You became the storm, unstoppable, undeniable, and eternally etched in the record of truth. This victory is more than a closed case, it's a statement, a blueprint, and a warning. It declares that power without integrity is fragile, that silence cannot protect abusers forever, and that courage paired with truth has the force to rewrite the rules entirely. Your story is now a precedent, a demonstration that justice,